Joining us from Oxford, England, with her new book, A Marble Column, Jane Eyre in India, is former university academic Cicely Haverly. Cicely, good morning. Welcome to Saturday Mornings.
And good morning to you. I wish I was in Singapore with you.
We wish you were here as well. Cicely, many of us may remember Charlotte Bronte's classic novel, Jane Eyre, from our school days. In some cases, for some of us, it's been a few decades. Refresh our memory, will you, about the novel Jane Eyre and its importance to literary history?
It was a sensation when it was first published in the mid-19th century. It was thought to be a very dangerous book because it asserted the right of a young and friendless woman to have ambitions, to treat herself seriously, to not kowtow to conventions, to feel that she was a valuable person. And this was considered rather shocking. That hymn, All Things Bright and Beautiful, that talks about the rich man in his castle and the poor man at his gate, that was what Jane Eyre was defying.
And over the centuries now, what importance has this particular novel played in the lexicon of literature and of teaching literature as well, and culture?
Well, it's the founding text, the grandmother of so much rom-com. Every heroine who takes down her hair and removes her glasses and is discovered to be beautiful is in some way a descendant of poor, plain Jane Eyre. But as I was saying earlier, there's a more serious message of that too.
Yeah, it's funny that you say, I've never heard the phrase rom-com used in relation to Jane Eyre, but tell us a little bit more about that. How does that interplay look in this original novel, which many people really, myself included, felt was quite a serious novel?
Oh, it's serious, all right. Jane is an orphan. She has no one to look after her but herself, and she meets this Byronic character, this not terribly pleasant character, but he is fascinating, Mr. Rochester, who becomes one of the two models for a kind of rather dangerous male sexuality in the mid-century. And the other one was her sister, Emily's Heathcliff, who really is a problem, I think. He's a nasty piece of work, but he is also endlessly fascinating. And to this day, many readers still find themselves falling hopelessly in love with either Mr. Rochester or Mr. Heathcliff.
So Mr. Rochester was the bad boy, right? And flawed but sexy, I think you described him at one juncture. Let's go.
He was flawed, all right. Yes, no doubt about it. He had his sexual history must have been very shocking by Victorian standards, and he tells it all to Jane, who remarkably takes it in her stride, doesn't faint away as many a Victorian heroine would do.
And as we're talking about this novel, we have to remember the day in which it was written, in which things like this were not discussed in polite company, and certainly not published, right? So this would have been quite, as you mentioned, shocking during those times.
And when I came to write my novel, I had to try and find ways of writing more explicitly about the sexual element of their relationship, but without offending the kind of standards that were felt operated in the 19th century. And that was quite fun. I wanted to stay sounding a little bit like Charlotte Bronte.
Sure. All right. Let's talk about that particular element in just a moment. But first, let's introduce your novel. It's just been published, available in Singapore and around the world. The title is A Marble Column, Jane Eyre in India. So take us through the story. Where does it start and how does it go?
It starts, I'm afraid, with an epidemic.
Hmm.
There were many epidemics in the 19th century, and their effects could be devastating. But it is over by the time we start the novel. However, it's left Jane deeply unsettled for reasons I'm going to keep a few secrets. I'm not going to give too many spoilers.
Sure, no spoilers. That's good.
And Jane is once again deeply unsettled. And although she's been married to Rochester now for 12 years, she can't help thinking about the suitor she rejected, the missionary who went to India without her, without anybody, and whose letters have long since dwindled. Letters which would have taken 6 months to arrive from India at that time. And Charlotte Bronte gave the last words of her novel to this character, St. John Rivers, which struck me as an invitation to try and find out what happened. But I wanted to keep Jane and especially Rochester on the scene. So I had to find a way of getting them to India, which was no small undertaking in those days.
So how did you figure, in a way that would be true to the original style and flavor of Jane Eyre, that you could then transport these two, Jane and Mr. Rochester, to India? How did that come about?
It was a difficult one. There had to be some kind of catastrophe in the background, which sent them on such hazardous voyage. And it took 6 months. But journeys are times of learning. And the journey in the company of a character I grew very fond of, a bishop and his wife, who were also setting out to convert the heathen, as they used to say, was an interesting part of the novel to write, because it prepared them for things they have not expected at all. All three of the main English characters are entirely bewildered by India. They don't know what to make of it. It's too much.
I think you'd find a lot of people, even in today's age, that might feel the same way.
Exactly. People talk about being changed by India, and by their experience of India, even when it's quite a shallow one, short holiday. But to leave the comforts of home, embark on a dangerous sea journey, includes the storm, and land amongst the teeming streets of a young Bombay, as it was then, is quite an experience for a nicely brought up English young lady.
We're talking with Cicely Havilia, the author of A Marble Column, Jane Eyre in India, which is a sequel to Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte from the 19th century. And this book has just been published, available in Singapore and around the world, online and through your favorite bookseller. As a former university academic, Cicely, this must have been, first of all, to even take this on must have been giving you a little bit of pause, and secondly, to do it in a way that was true and honest and believable must have also been a huge challenge. How long did it take you to conceive of this, and then actually to do all the research and get it written?
Well, the idea came to me quite a long time ago, but I suppose this book is another of the many unexpected fruits of lockdown in the end. But I knew the text well. It was one I always enjoyed teaching, and I taught it many, many hundreds of times probably. Men came to it thinking this is girl stuff, but very often were converted and found themselves deeply and emotionally involved in it. But I'd also, I'm married to an Indian, my family have family connections in India. So I read and studied a great deal about 19th century accounts of India. So I was getting the background long before I'd really thought about writing a novel. But this invitation, leaving a character whose fate is uncertain at the end of a book, as Charlotte Bronte does, was nagging at me. And to cut a very long story short, at one point it looked as though I had a rather grave illness, and I suddenly felt I've been meaning to do this. I better get on with it. And in the end, the symptoms, I had surgery, but the symptoms, nothing happened. I'm fine. But I continued to write the book. I left it in the end. It wasn't going anywhere, but then COVID-19 happened. Time on my hands. And once again, an inspiration to try and get something down. I've written a great deal in my life, but never a novel before.
Well, we're certainly happy to hear that you are back in good health, and that scare was just that, a scare at this point, and also that you made good use of a couple of years of a global pandemic as you were writing about issues that would not have been unfamiliar back in the 19th century. When you think about this current book and even the original Jane Eyre, what lessons then are transportable to us today? What can we learn, or what should we learn from these two books?
That is a difficult one, Glenn.
But I know you're a professional. I know you can get this.
I think it's that no matter what life throws at you, there's something to be learned from it.
Okay.
And Jane and Rochester are really not in a good place when they start out on this voyage. The shock of the epidemic that they've just emerged from has left them battered and nearly estranged. And Jane is so determined to find out what has happened to the missionary she rejected that she's really rather lost touch with the love of her life. And so the story is really about how she and he rediscover their very impressive, very moving relationship. But it's also about how a man as austere as the missionary was in Jane Eyre can be broken down and then reassembled by the trials of life. He does fall in love. He has his own love story too. And it's a rather shocking one by the standards of the day. And leads to complete misunderstandings which have to be cleared up. But I'd like to reassure readers that there is a wedding at the end, and that it's not the one they might think of when they're in the middle of the book, that things seem to end happily. But the book also raises lots of questions, because the three English characters with the best of intentions are causing trouble. They hardly know it, but their benevolent deeds are actually the source of a great deal of later trouble as imperial attitudes begin to harden up. There was a time in India when things might have gone very differently, better, but in fact, historical conditions at the beginning of the century tended to drive Indians and the British further apart.
Yeah. Are there any lessons there? You talked about the, characters breaking down to kind of reassemble himself and find out who he is, and amid the strife of times where there was class differentials, and there were pandemics, and there were all kinds of things going on. I mean, you say that without putting dates to it, and you could be talking about the year 2022 in many ways. and 2020 to 2022. Was that present for you when you were writing it? Is that something you tried to weave in, or at least subtext, have a subtext of it?
When I started to write, no, it wasn't. It was almost as if history and the pandemic caught up with me. And I thought, my goodness, these are exactly the kind of situations that recur in history. The diseases of Victorian England were so devastating. Yeah. We forget that nearly half of all children born in the country would die before they reach the age of 5.
Wow. Wow.
If you got beyond 5, you had a decent chance of living to
30.
4 years and 10. But 5, infancy was a terribly dangerous time for Victorian children, and of course their mothers. Yes, yes.
Interesting. As you look at this this book now, and it's going out, somebody's going to ask the question, do I have to read the original Jane Eyre to then pick up this book to carry on, whether or not they may have not read it earlier, or whether it's been decades that they've read it? Is your book self-contained enough that somebody can just pick up yours and just carry on?
Yes, I hope it is. A very good friend in New York read an earlier version and told me flatly that there was too much reliance on the original. So fortunately, in these days, when your manuscript isn't handwritten, re-engineering a book is not that difficult. In fact, I like that kind of problem solving. It's the best part of writing for me.
Yeah.
So I think I can say confidently that it would probably help if you've seen one of the many, many film versions or television versions. But all you really need is a sense that this is a love story, Jane and Rochester, that there's and perhaps you need to remember the notorious mad wife in the attic, who was the person whose continuing existence up there prevented the original marriage of Jane and Rochester, one of the most dramatic moments in any wedding ceremony in fiction or in life, I think.
Well, we are certainly looking to getting a copy of it here in Singapore. It will be available in Singapore and around the world, just being published now. The name of the book is A Marble Column, Jane Eyre. In India, it picks up where the original Jane Eyre novel by Charlotte Bronte left off. And with us today has been the author, Cicely Haverley. Thank you so much, Cicely, joining us from Oxford. And we do appreciate your time, and we're wishing you great success with this book.
Thank you very much, Glenn.